Good evening and thank you for attending the Entrepreneurship Lab's kickoff event for the new academic year. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our guests visiting PACE from outside tonight, and extend a special welcome to Professor Niso Abaf, bringing his entrepreneurial finance class, and Professor Casey Frid, who's here with his business strategy class. I'm Bruce Backenheimer. I'm a clinical professor of management. I'm the director of the Entrepreneurship Lab. The lab is a collaborative workspace designed to bring students from PACE's 6 schools and colleges together with the aim of promoting experiential learning, cross-disciplinary problem solving, and the development of an entrepreneurial mindset. For more information about the lab, and to register to use it, please visit pace.edu/elab. Easy to remember. And if you'd like to tweet about tonight's event, if we're using the hashtag PACEELAB, just PACEELAB. And so feel free to have your mobile phones out if you just turn off the ringers, though, that would be helpful. So now I'm pleased to introduce Sam Hamadeh. Sam is the founder and CEO of PrivCo. He's a veteran media entrepreneur, corporate attorney, and financial expert based here in New York. In 1997, Sam co-founded Vault.com, the web's leading career information website, upon graduating with an MBA from the Wharton School of Business and a JD from University of Pennsylvania Law School. Sam served as the venture-backed company's president through the sale of a majority stake in Vault in 2007 to major private equity firm for nearly $100 million. In 2009, Sam then founded the leading private company financial data provider PrivCo, and has since served as PrivCo's CEO. Sam's honors and awards include Small Businessman of the Year by Crain's magazine, the Harvard Business School Club's Entrepreneur of the Year, Silicon Valley Reporter's 100 Most Influential Media Executives, Deloitte and Touche's 50 Fastest Growing Companies, and the University of Pennsylvania Law School's Young Alumnus of the Year Award. Sam has also served on the board of managers of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, the Entrepreneur and Innovation Advisory Board for a major U.S. congressional candidate, and has been the official entrepreneur residence at the Wharton School, advising MBA students on their startup business plans. He also serves each year as a final round judge for the annual Wharton Business Plan competition. Sam has authored 12 books about entrepreneurship, business, and careers that have been published by Random House and Houghton Mifflin. He's also worked on mergers and acquisitions and IPOs as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, and on securities transactions at the leading New York City law firm Cravath, Swaine & Moore. I would encourage students to visit PrivCo.com, that's PRIVCO.com, when doing research on private companies. As you know, there's tons of data for public companies, very easy to get, but for private companies, it's much harder. We requested that the library subscribe to PrivCo, which they are currently evaluating, and with a limited budget, they have to ensure that any subscriptions would be of particular value to students. So if this is a resource you'd like to have, please be sure to let the library know. After Sam speaks, we'll have a Q&A session followed by some time for informal networking. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sam.
Thank you, Bruce, for that introduction. So I'm going to try to keep this a little informal and pretty much off the cuffs. By the way, any of you who'd like to move forward, we have lots of empty seats toward the front. So don't be shy, we'll call on you. Please feel free to move forward. All right, so as Bruce pretty much gave my introduction, but I've been a lifelong entrepreneur since really the age of 17 when I started college. To help pay my way through school, I started a custom course pack publishing business. Essentially, we published those course materials where the professor decided instead of a textbook, he would get materials, articles from lots of different sources. And that's how I paid my way through UCLA. It got big enough that at one point half my fraternity were my employees, which, as you can imagine, firing a fraternity brother is a bit awkward. And being an 18 or 19-year-old kid, trying to get professors or heads of departments to give you their business was sometimes a challenge. In fact, I joke in my office sometimes that I got fake eyeglasses and fake gray hair dye sometimes for meetings, just to put a little bit in the temples, just to look a little bit older. So being a young entrepreneur obviously is a strike against you. So who in the room today is currently a student? Okay, and who is considering starting a company? Okay, and of you guys, are some of you considering doing it right out of school? Okay, all right. So it's not an easy life, I will tell you that. But I also will tell you that I would not trade, places with anybody, frankly. So just a bit about PrivCo. I think Bruce gave a pretty good summary, but PrivCo, my current startup, is the leading financial data provider on privately held companies, including startups, of course, which is very helpful for competitive intelligence, analysis of who's getting funded, who's funding who, and even a good way to find investors. And we'll make sure and work with Bruce in the library to make sure that by the end of the year, you guys will have access to PrivCo. So having done this essentially, so after college, I sold my printing business for just enough to pay for grad school. At that point, I was 21. Decided now's my chance while I'm still young to go out east and get a JD and an MBA. And I went to Philadelphia, to UPenn, did a 4-year program where I got a law degree and MBA in finance, and that allowed me to have 3 summers to try lots of different things. So I spent a summer at Morgan Stanley on the trading floor, spent a summer at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, spent another summer at Cravath, Swaine & Moore working on IPOs and M&A deals as a lawyer. And after that experience, I decided that none of it was for me. So to the horror and shock of my parents, I graduated on the Sunday and packed up my U-Haul and moved to New York City, not really knowing a soul, and set up this idea, crazy idea I had called Vault.com in my living room in the West Village, where the first employees just kind of crammed in there. And we sort of survived that way for 6 months until the landlady got tired of it and basically threatened to throw us out. And we got a real office. We ended up raising 2 rounds of venture capital. We got lots of offers to buy the company over the years. And finally, in 2007, reached a point where we decided that the price was right, the buyer was right, so we did sell a majority stake in the company. Everyone did quite well. So what are some of the lessons I've learned from going through that process? So I kind of summarized it into 10 key lessons learned on how to maximize your odds of startup company success. And another way to look at it really is to minimize the odds of failure. Because 3 out of 4 venture-backed startups fail is a statistic, and for non-venture-backed, it's more like 9 out of 10. So the odds are stacked against you, so these 10 lessons are to help you maximize your odds of success. Okay, so lesson 1, the idea. Right, where did you get the idea to start a company? One thing that I think is very important is you have to have some kind of knowledge of that industry. Okay, and one thing I've learned is being a Wharton's entrepreneur in residence, what essentially that means is every 20 minutes, some student, MBA or undergrad, comes in with their business idea. And in that brief amount of time, I have to kind of understand what they're trying to do and kind of ask them questions to help, fine-tune the business plan. I can't tell you how many people come in with ideas to start companies and businesses. They have absolutely no experience in that business. You have men who want to start women's cosmetics lines. You have women that want to start, they've never worked in the industry. They're not even a natural user of the product. They just think it's a good money-making idea. So that's the absolute worst way to come up with a business idea. It really should come from you as a student, or ideally working, if you do afterwards for a couple of years, and seeing a gap in the marketplace. So whether you go and work in marketing, in advertising, in pharmaceuticals, at some point you'll get that eureka moment and see that I can't believe this is not being done. Okay, that's the best way to come up with a business idea. Okay, so that's key. Don't start a company in an industry you have absolutely no knowledge of. So second question here on the idea is, should you have a co-founder? You know, I think a co-founder is overrated, but it can be helpful sometimes. So one is maybe that person does have industry knowledge, right, that you lack. Maybe they have complementary skills that fill gaps that you don't. Perfect case would be a technology, co-founder. That person has skills you don't have. You might be a shy person and they're kind of a face person. So they would lead sales and give talks and attend presentations, and that's the kind of co-founder I had at Ball. So it worked well. But it really should be someone you know well, right? Probably not someone you met in class, ideally someone you observed in the workplace to see what their work ethic is like. A lot of your friends might be great friends, but horrible employees. In fact, there are a lot of friends who ask me to refer them for jobs that I just can't, in good conscience, refer them because I just can't do it. I could never refer them to an employer. But they're wonderful friends. So, step one. So industry knowledge, and think about that co-founder. So the second big lesson I would say is focus, focus, focus. So whatever the idea is, I'm not saying think small. You should have some concept of where the business could go someday, but at least start with something bite-sized and digestible. And again, my quote, I think, was before you conquer the world, consider trying to conquer Jersey, right? And a perfect example of that is Vault. At first, we knew that we wanted to become the premier provider of career information on the web. But we started at first with just doing the major employers at top business schools, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bain, and so forth. And we got very quick traction because that universe all sort of knows each other. And word spread like wildfire. So by year 2, we then went to the top law schools and covered all the top law firms. By year 3, we were doing all top employers of all undergrad schools, so Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, so forth. And gradually we added even graduate school admissions subscriptions for admissions essays and so forth. Another good example is the Princeton Reviews, founder John Katzen I know well. They decided early on they were just going to master the SAT only, whereas their main competitor, Kaplan, was at that point spread quite thin. They were doing SAT, they were doing GMAT, they were doing MCAT. By focusing on just the SAT, they very quickly became the #1 score raiser in the SAT and caused enormous headaches for Kaplan. Kaplan was so big and so spread thin that they were able to quickly become the go-to #1 source in SAT prep. Once they did that, after 5, 6, 7 years, of course, they did MCAT, GMAT, and you name it, ended up becoming a $150 million public company. So, two key lesson is focus wins, have a sense of where the business might go, but at first just do one thing and do it really, really well and better than anybody else. So the third key lesson is what I call validating the idea, which also includes customer discovery. So how do you do that? Well, you don't do it the way they teach you in marketing class, which is to do market research and focus groups. Because people will say anything in a survey. So if you have an idea for, say, an internet company, and you try to send out surveys to potential customers or call them and say, I'm describing a product to you. What's the likelihood you would buy it? On a scale from 1 to 10. Right, people will say almost anything in a survey. You know how many surveys I've taken just to, get a $50 honorarium or something? I mean, I speed through those things so fast, right? The surveys, market research mean nothing because you can describe almost anything and they'll say, yeah, it depends on the price, depends on what it does, but sure, that sounds like it could be something I would use, but that doesn't really tell you anything. So when I talk about idea validation, I'm talking about you actually have to go into potential customers and pretend as if the company exists, okay? I know, it's kind of hard to fake it, but you gotta make business cards, you gotta have a PowerPoint with fake screenshots, you make calls, you get meetings, and you go in and you actually ask them for a contract. Now, obviously you don't wanna go to your top eventual customers because you're probably gonna blow those meetings. But the goal is not to get a contract. The goal is to ask them, here's our product, what do you use now, where do you see it lacking, and here's the price, here's the contract, I'm asking you to buy it. And then you shut up and you listen. And you will learn so much from those phone calls and meetings. And by the way, you can't outsource that. You can't hire a sales guy to say, go and do this. You as founder or founders have to go and talk to the customers directly, put that suit on, with those business cards, with that PowerPoint, with those fake screenshots, and you have to listen and look them in the eye. And trust me, you have to also do a nice sampling. You may think that your best buyer is, say, financial services or bankers, right? But you could see ancillary uses for headhunters. You could see ancillary uses for ad agencies. Try some of those guys too. Because the customer will tell you, A, what's wrong with your product, B, what's wrong with your pricing, C, they'll tell you, oh, this is already being done by X, Y, and Z company, companies you had never heard of, right? You can go back to your office and you look that up. Fourth, the guy you thought was probably a third or fourth later type class of customer, let's say an ad agency or a headhunter, that's the person that kind of eyes start widening in the meeting and leans forward and wants to know more. And so all of a sudden what you've discovered is what you thought the target market was is actually very different. And the part of your presentation, as far as feature sets of your product, that got people excited was not the first one you presented, it was actually the fourth one. That ended up being the one with the eyes lit up. But that's not something you can tell on the phone or through a survey. Okay, so throw out what you learned in market research class and actually go in and pitch your product. Okay? That's idea validation. Okay, so once you've done that, you have to launch what is called the minimally viable product. So what is that? So this is essentially a prototype. Okay? Let's assume it's an internet company. So you have to think of all the features, the minimum number of features are absolutely essential for a customer to actually try it and demo it. Okay? The bare minimum. Because believe me, so many startups fail because they just keep improving and improving and improving, and they never get real world customer feedback because it's not good enough to ship yet. And so what I always say is, if version 1 of your product isn't embarrassing, then you're waiting too long to just launch it, right? Because you should be embarrassed, that prototype. That's kind of the point, okay? So that minimally viable product. And then you go now again and pitch customers, except now instead of screenshots, you're walking them through a live prototype. And you're asking them to buy. Okay, so you then ship that minimally viable product, you get the customer feedback, you then iterate the product, launch version 2.0, get more customer feedback, iterate, launch 3.0, and this keeps going forever. It's an endless process of iteration. Okay, so very, very important concept. So key lesson 5. The biggest reason startups fail is they scale sales and marketing too fast. Right? Before they've even gotten customer feedback and gotten to version 2.0 or 3.0, they've already hired the sales team, they've already started marketing, and they haven't even begun listening to customers and iterating the product yet. So the number one key reason startups fail is not that the idea wasn't good, is that they squandered so much time and money on building a product that the customer ultimately, they find out, doesn't want. And at that point, they've run out of time and cash and can't make the right product that the customers do want. Okay, so that's the key lesson number 5. Do not scale or hire salespeople until you've actually gotten to, say, version 2.0 or 3.0 or just above embarrassing. Then you can hire the first salesperson. But the first sales calls have got to be made by you as founder or founders. And even when you hire a salesperson, you better attend those meetings and listen in on those calls. Because listening to the customer, and by the way, not a day goes by at PrivCo or even at Vault where I don't pick up the phone and cold call the customer. I have to do that. I have to hear from the customer every day. what they like, what they don't like, and any new competitors that have been calling. Like, I want to know. So you cannot ever fully delegate sales to a sales team. Okay, ultimately, companies win or lose really on sales at the end of the day. All right, key lesson 5. All right, so funding and venture capitalists. Any VCs in the room? Okay, I've spoken at entrepreneurial conferences and at Wharton, for example, and as you can imagine, all the sponsors and banners are venture capital firms. So they don't like what I'm about to say. Number one, VCs don't know anything about how to run a company. Nothing. 95% of them are former bankers and financiers who went to VC just because it's fewer hours and more money. Okay? There are some good VCs out there, but they're the ones that started a company, sold it. Someone like Vinod Khosla, formerly of Sequoia, now Khosla Venture, Andreessen Horowitz, and Mark Andreessen obviously built Netscape, who then, sold the company, decided for whatever reason to join the dark side. All right? Those are actually decent VCs, but they're a small, sadly, minority. Okay? They don't know anything about actually running a business. Okay, so what VCs do is what they do, and they say with a straight face, we're really good at pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. That's a fancy term for saying we basically invest in what worked before, right? So if someone just got some other VC firm they compete with just got a nice exit, and it's a mobile app, their brilliant pattern recognition is mobile apps are hot. We're going to have to invest. The next investment is going to focus on mobile apps. The other pattern recognition they do is that our most successful investments have been ones founded by 2 men, and therefore that's a pattern recognition. That if 2 women come in, that doesn't meet their pattern. I'm being serious. This is what they say behind closed doors, right? Or they were Ivy League graduates, or whatever. That's their brilliant pattern recognition. Mostly they just invest in what's hot at the moment. The problem is that if they invest in you, what's hot at the moment continuously changes. And one of the most frustrating things of all with working with VCs was every other week they have some new idea about how to change it all to meet what was being bought, acquired at the moment. When consumer internet stopped being hot, it was all about B2B. Well, it's got to become B2B. We got to turn it into an HR software company. And then 2 weeks later, some other crazy. It was one after the other. So honestly, in 2004, when I used the cash flow from the company to buy out the VCs, was probably the happiest day of my life. And if I ever have a kid, it'll be a tie, probably. I was thrilled to get rid of it. So are there some exceptions? Yes. So when do you need to actually go to VCs to raise money? Well, the good news is the cost of starting a company keeps going down. Technology is now so cheap. You can launch an internet company or an app for under $10,000. There's outsourcing available. Server cost used to be minimum for a dedicated server, $7,000 a month. Now you can go down to your Amazon Cloud beginning at $50 a month. So all the cost of startups is going down. So don't have it drilled into you that you need a VC. When do you need a VC? Well, if the business is capital intensive, if you have to build a factory, right, to sell solar panels, well, then you're going to have to raise a lot of money, right? If time to market is critical, which by the way, usually is not. Sometimes it's better to be the second mover, right? And that's a whole other talk, the second mover advantage, right? But if legitimately time to market is an issue, and part of getting that time to market is having a lot of capital, then fine. You may need to, meet VCs. Either way, I would say you need to wait as long as possible. Because the longer you wait, just like at Vault we did, the more you get to help dictate the terms. Okay? Here are some of the terms that come along with a VC round. Okay, you ready for this? By the way, you can look up VC round terms on PrivCo. Some of the rights they have include the right to fire you at any time as founders. They then put you on a vesting schedule for your stock. So let's say you own, after the round, 50% of the stock, sold 50% to the VC firm. They take your 50% and say you then are starting from day one, and you'll vest that over 4 years, right? And they'll say, well, that just could be because you're so valuable. We don't want to lose you. So to keep you, you're going to have to re-earn your stock all over again over 4 years. Remember, by the way, what I just said before, they can fire you at any time. And they often do. So you vested 2 months worth of your stock, right? Because why do they want 23-year-old CL running their company and they just put $10 million in? All right? Number 3, they have what's called a liquidation preference. Anyone know what that is? A liquidation preference? It means if they put into the term sheet a 2 times liquidation preference, and they put in 10 million, and the company, they have to get first 2 times their money back, and then you guys start splitting 50-50, or whatever the ownership percentage is. So they invest 10 million in the company, you work hard for 3 years, it sells for 18, they get the whole 18, and you get 0. If it sells for 21, they get their 20, and you guys split the 1 50-50. You get 500,000. Should I go on? You also have what's called accumulated but unpaid dividend. So they're on their investment, say 8% a year, which is typical. So they're accumulating now 800,000 a year of accumulated and declared yet unpaid dividend. So on top of the liquidation preference, if it sells for 21, most likely that 800 grand a year dividend on the $10 million investment has been accumulating, and they'll then get that first as well. Then you can start splitting what's left. Okay? So when we talk about 1 in 4 VC-backed companies not failing, if you actually include failing from the entrepreneur's perspective, it's actually much higher. That just means it didn't fail for the VC firm. That does not mean it didn't fail for you. And so the pitch they use is, but Bill, wouldn't you rather own 20% of something than 100% of nothing? That's the pitch. You will hear it. Because if we back you, we have such a great track record, we have a network, we can introduce you to clients. Somehow after the deal is done, none of those contacts appear. There's no clients being introduced. They never materialize. So you end up with 20% of something as opposed to 100% quote nothing. So anyway, at a minimum, wait until you've hit as many milestones as possible. You have paying customers. You let them start coming to you. And they already now start coming to PrivCo, right? Luckily now I don't need any outside investors because I'm the sole investor. But they already started calling. They've already started calling. Wait till that starts to happen if you possibly can. So at least at that point, you can say, I'll take your money, but there's not going to be a liquidation preference, and there's not going to be an accumulated dividend. And by the way, I get to have a majority of the board seats, say 3 out of 5, which means that although the board can fire me, I control 3 of the seats. That's what happened at Vault, because by the time the VCs first invested, Vault had such a great brand that they agreed that we control 3 out of 5 seats, which also helped in the negotiation by amount. Lesson 7 is that costs kill startups. This is related to scaling sales and marketing too soon. But first of all, one thing to remember is that every cost is negotiable. Okay, whatever it is, rent, server cost, if you won't take 5 minutes, or anyone on your team won't take 5 minutes to ask for a discount, first of all, 9 times out of 10 the answer is yes. But if you won't even ask, you can do the math. If you just spent 5 minutes to save yourself $1,000, you're earning your company $5,000, $10,000 an hour. That's a good use of your time. So if you ever hear one of your first employees just spending whatever the asking price is, get rid of that person. First, try to teach them, but if they are unteachable, get rid of them. Because everything's negotiable. But really, in the early days of your startup, you need that precious cash and that precious time so that you can help iterate your product and perfect it. And you just don't want to run out of time, meaning cash, before you get there, right? How sad that you finally perfected your product, but no one's ever going to see it. Because you, unfortunately, spent money on things you shouldn't have been spending on. Okay, so cash is precious. It's your lifeblood, and treat it so. Okay, lesson 8. This is for you PrivCo people in the house too. Is hire slowly and fire quickly. Let me repeat that because this is very important. Hire slowly and fire quickly. As soon as you see someone is not up to the job for whatever reason, right? You brought in somebody that looked great on paper, you went through the interview process, and by the way, just a little bit more on how to hire well and slowly, is make the person who you're considering hiring actually do live in front of you the job they would be doing. If it's a bookkeeper or controller, sit there for an hour while they actually close out and do a bank reconciliation. You'd be shocked how many can't do it despite it being on their resume. Or assuming that, well, they've been a controller for 10 years, they must know how to do a bank rec. If it's a coder, they have to actually write some lines of code while you watch them. Whether it's lost password retrieval, whatever it is, they have to sit there and physically write the code. Once again, you'll be shocked that like one out of 2 people that you were about to hire can't do it. If it's a salesperson, you guys know this, the last step is to pick up the phone, and you have 24 hours to prepare, and pitch me on PrivCo, or pitch me on Vault. And you're calling me at 8 p.m. tomorrow at this time, and that's the final step. And some people just cannot, they're nervous, they fumble their work, they just can't do it. So don't ever hire anyone without having them physically do, as a final step, for you, what they would be doing on the job. You'll be stunned, and you won't ever forget that lesson. Okay? But on the firing part, after all that, if you bring someone on, it's by the way, clear in the first week if you've made a mistake. Okay? The natural reaction is, of course, at this point, we've gone through this 2-month recruiting process, we narrowed it down to this one person, and you want to try to fix it. It's like a relationship, right? You go to counseling, you're working on it. A good employee isn't supposed to be work, right? It's supposed to be a relief. So if in the first week or 2 you're already having to start to make things work, trust me on this, say it's not a good fit, and let them go immediately. Don't keep them on for months because you're just too afraid to fire somebody or hurt their feeling. Because I guarantee you, you'll end up doing it, it's just a matter of when. So why would you spend all that precious money and time? Okay? Key lesson, hire slowly and fire quickly. Okay, so key lesson number 9 is, when do you sell the company and how do you sell the company? When do you know if it's time to sell the company? So obviously by the time we get to lesson 9, you've actually survived. You've made it through the worst part of the whole process. Although there's never, an easy time. But relatively speaking, once you have 100 employees and a management team layers who can actually leave town on vacation and know that the place is not going to burn down, the question is then, people start calling you and saying, would you consider selling the company? Employees who may have been working 10 years with options would love to be able to buy a house, get married, have kids, whatever it is. So the question is, should you sell the company? And if so, how? And what are the alternatives? So let's talk about that. First key lesson is never ever negotiate with only one buyer. Ever. You always must, if you have a serious buyer, you must hire a bank or firm to then field other potential offers. You want to see all the offers on the table, and you want the buyer, the potential buyer, to know that there are other people also submitting their best offers. It's like selling a house. Hire a broker, you should have open houses, you want all the bids to come in at once. And select and negotiate the best deal possible. Okay, so that's rule number one. Never just do one negotiation at a time. It will be a nightmare. Okay, because they'll know they're the only guy, and the terms keep getting worse and worse every other day as you get closer to closing. Number two, it takes you time away from your business. Number three, your employees know that you're going through this process because you can't keep it a secret. They get nervous. So for all those reasons, when you do it the right way, hire a bank, field multiple offers, and negotiate all of them at the same time. Okay? But the other thing I'll say is there are alternatives to selling that a lot of people don't think about. Things we did at Vault included. We paid 3 cash dividends. First it was 2 cents per share, then it was 10 cents per share, then it was 20 cents per share. So by the time we even sold the majority, every investor had gotten all of their money back. Every employee had pulled out hundreds of thousands of dollars in dividend. Okay, so it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And second, you can do things like doing cash tender offers if you want to get rid of maybe some shareholders that are eager. Like, look, if you're that eager, here's a tender offer. We're tendering an offer for 20 cents a share. I did that at Vault, by the way, and got rid of 5 investors that way. It's good for us because we ended up selling for 10 times that price, right? So the point is, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but when the time does come, at least do it right. So final lesson number 10, and this applies to life in general, by the way, is as an entrepreneur, you will live, breathe, and sleep your idea. And ideas for new product features, for new clients to contact, they will come up in the most bizarre places and time. At the gym, on the toilet, in the middle of the night. I urge you to use this habit that I teach my team. At the moment you're thinking of that idea, immediately put it in your phone or your memo pad or email yourself a note at that moment. Don't assume you're going to wake up in the morning and remember that moment of brilliance, okay? Brilliance is fleeting. My friend Jack Dorsey founded a company you might have heard of called Twitter. That idea came to him in a coffee shop. He pulled out a notebook instantly and started sketching it out at that moment. And I'm going to show you the sketch. He tore out a page from his notepad and he started sketching out this idea. Had he waited till he got home, or the next day, or the day after that, at that moment he was caffeined up, he got the idea, that eureka moment, he pulled out a notepad from his bag, and he started sketching out this concept, Twitter. And you can see Jack is, of course, the first guy. This was the first idea for Twitter. So whenever you have those eureka moments, I urge you, write them down immediately. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning, grab your phone, email it to yourself, put it back, go back to sleep. If you're at the gym, open your phone, put it in the memo pad or an email, and go back to your workout. Okay? Do not wait. Do not wait. There would be no Twitter, probably, had you not done that, used that habit. So in closing, I'm going to leave you with a few parting thoughts. Some quotes, okay? So number one, being an entrepreneur is enormously hard work, okay? It's not like a job where as soon as you leave the job, even if it's midnight, you come home, you don't think about your job. As an entrepreneur, you think about it, okay? I also like to say, whereas employees get to have good days and bad days, or good days and bad weeks, we entrepreneurs have good hours and bad hours. Literally. 1 hour we'll sign a brand new deal with Andreessen Horowitz. The next hour, one of your key employees pulls you aside and says, unfortunately, I'm quitting to go work on Wall Street for more money. And the next hour, the Financial Times will call and get a quote in the Financial Times. It's a roller coaster. You have to be prepared for that. You will have good hours and bad hours. So when you come home and says, honey, how was your day? It's like, let me start with 9 o'clock and we'll work our way through it. Because it's not like being an employee, where the day was kind of good or bad. It's kind of a little of both, most days. And I've actually asked my team, if anyone of you ever want to trade places with me for a week as CEO, no one has ever taken me up on it. Because they see it never ends. Okay? Another Silicon Valley entrepreneur, I like this quote, so I thought I'd give it to you. Just the notion of how you work 24/7. He says Saturdays are just Fridays with better traffic. That's what life as an entrepreneur is like. Okay? The other thing is the problem with being your own boss, nobody steal from. Right? Some people get used to stealing pens and whatever. You're stealing from yourself, guys. You're not entrepreneur. All right? Having said that, I'm so glad I did not return to Goldman Sachs. I'm so glad I did not return to Cravat. And I would never give up my life as an entrepreneur, because you know what? I realized that had I taken those jobs, I knew very quickly I was adding no value to the world. I wasn't making anyone's lives easier. I was moving securities around and taking a piece of it. I was profiting by taking a piece of other people's creation. So being an entrepreneur is worth it. So if you have an urge to do it, I encourage you to do it. Don't be afraid. What's the worst that could happen? You're young, right? You bounce back, you go get a job. And you're not on your own, you have support. You have the PACE Entrepreneurship Lab. You have the Small Business Administration. You have guys like me who are willing to come and speak and be mentors. But I just want you all to promise me one thing today, and listen carefully, because this is important. That if you do beat the odds, like I did, and you do make it, I want you all to promise me you will give back. You will mentor, you will speak at schools, you will volunteer, you will donate to the PACE Entrepreneurship Center. Will you all promise me that? All right, deal. Thank you all for coming.